Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. It's a very beautiful day here at the park today. Nice Sunday morning. A lot of people out and about enjoying the wonderful weather. Today is one of the best days I've seen so far this season. It's just about as nice as you could ask for. The temperature is perfect, the air is clean and clear. It's a really wonderful day to come outside and make a video. I hope we get more days like this over the coming weeks and months. We'll have to see. Yeah, it's just really nice today. Today's video is about a really cool camera, one of the more uncommon vintage Japanese cameras, and one which I don't see so many good examples of even here in Japan. And that is the Kallo 180 rangefinder camera, sometimes called the Kowa 180, depending on which version you have, which was produced in Japan in 1959 or so. Kowa was a kind of a large manufacturer of cameras back in the 1950s and 60s. They produced medium format cameras, for example, twin lens reflex cameras like the Kallo Flex, cameras like the Kowa 6, which was kind of an odd, I don't know, Hasselblad kind of single lens reflex medium format camera. There were a large number of 35mm cameras produced, and I think a couple of folding cameras as well. So they produced a large number of cameras in that era. They no longer produce cameras, though they are still in business today, and nowadays they manufacture survey equipment, which is used around the world by construction and engineering firms and things like that. Kowa's headquarters is not so far away. They're kind of like located in the Nihonbashi area of Tokyo, kind of on the other side of town here. But yeah, it's kind of a shame they stopped making cameras because they did produce really high quality stuff back in those days. Now the Kowa 180 is very similar in appearance to a camera called the Kowa 140, which looks almost identical, except that the 140 has a larger f1.4 lens, and that the 140 is an interchangeable lens camera. Besides the standard f1.4 lens, a wide angle and telephoto lens were also made available for it. The 180 is a much simpler camera and pretty much a no frills, no nonsense, very high quality, easy to use 35mm rangefinder camera. As I said, there was a Kowa version of this camera, and the Kowa version is pretty much just has a Kowa emblem kind of glued on the front here. There are other variations of these cameras. One, I think the 181 and 182, and these were basically the same camera as the 180, except that they featured a built-in integrated light meter system. Personally, I prefer the versions, the 180, which does not have the light meter, because I think the camera looks a lot cleaner. And it's hard to find the 181 cameras which have accurate light meters. So let's go ahead and take a look at the features and functions and how to use the Kowa 180. We'll go ahead and start on the top here. And as you can see, the top is very clean. There's nothing on it at all. There isn't a letter or a number or anything unnecessary. It's completely flat other than just a few basic things. It's kind of flat on this side, which allows for a larger viewfinder system. As you can see, it has quite a large eyepiece compared to other rangefinder cameras. And the lack of a film rewind mechanism on here allows for a larger viewfinder rangefinder assembly to be installed, which allows for increased focusing accuracy. So, pretty clean on the top. We have a shoe for mounting a flash gun, and of course this is a cold shoe, and if you're going to use a flash gun with this camera, you'll have to use the PC sync socket located on the front. Always be sure to run the cable behind the camera rather than in front, because for whatever reason these cables always tend to find their way in front of the lens when you're trying to shoot. Over here we have the shutter release button, which accepts a standard cable release. And of course here we have the film winding and shutter charging lever, which also has an integrated film counter dial. Located on the back here, I already pointed out the viewfinder window. Over here we have this kind of large flat screw, which you remove to adjust the rangefinder underneath. On the back here we have a simple computer. I can't really call it a computer, but just kind of a dial which you use to set the film speed and film type. This isn't connected to the internal parts of the camera in any way, so it doesn't matter what you have it set to. This is just for you to use to remind yourself what kind of film you have loaded inside the camera. On the bottom of the camera we have the release button, which you have to push in. This unlocks the winding mechanism and allows you to rewind the film. The film rewind lever is on this side, and you simply pop it out like so, and you turn it to rewind the film. It's kind of a gear-driven system, so it rewinds the film very quickly. And in the center here we have a standard 1/4-inch tripod socket, so you can use this with pretty much any modern tripod. As this is a fixed lens rangefinder camera, all the important stuff, or most of the important stuff, is located on the lens body. At the base we have the focusing ring, which has a focusing tab located over here on the side. We have a focusing scale on the bottom here, and this is arranged in meters. In front of the focusing scale we have a depth of field scale, and this will let you know what the depth of field is for any given aperture. Before that, or in front of those, we have a kind of a triple combination ring system. It adjusts the aperture, the shutter speed, and an EV number scale, which sounds kind of complicated, but this was actually cutting-edge technology back in the 1950s, in the days before cameras were electronic. Light meters in those days were set in light values, for example, light value like the EV scale, or in foot candles or things like that. The EV scale was most simple for people to understand, and a lot of light meters just showed EV numbers. And to operate a camera with an EV system like this, you simply turn the dial until the EV number shown on the top matches what is shown on the light meter. And when you do this, it sets the aperture ring and shutter speed ring to the right combinations to work within that light value. So if it's like right now in the light I'm in, I'd say this is maybe EV, say 12 or so. And at EV 12 I would have a range of shutter speeds from say 1/15 of a second at f16 to 1/500th of a second at f2.8. It sounds a little bit complicated, but once you get used to it, it's actually quite fast and simple and easy to use. And the Kowa 180, unlike a lot of other rangefinder cameras at the time, had a really good EV computer system. This is usually the Achilles heel of many of these old rangefinder cameras. In some of these things, they're very difficult to use or almost impossible to use. And in some of the cameras, I tend to disable this feature to make it easier for people to operate the camera, but in the Kowa 180, these usually work quite well and people don't have any trouble with them. So you can set the speeds independently. It just takes a little bit more work between moving the rear ring here, which moves the combination of shutter speed and aperture settings, and the front ring. And you can move both of these rings independently until you get the shutter speed and aperture combination you're trying to get. Over here we have a switch here which switches between the X-Sync speed and manual operation, and we have a self-timer on the bottom. And as I've said in many of my previous videos, do not use the self-timers on these old rangefinder cameras or TLR cameras or pretty much any other kind of old film camera, because these are not very reliable. The problem I have with these, or the problem that they have, is that they're not as resistant to corrosion or other problems as the actual shutter mechanism. And I often come across like compression washers which have rust or things on the self-timers, and that causes them to lock up. Sometimes you can force the timer along until it gets to the end and then you can use the camera again. Sometimes you can't. And if the self-timer is stuck and you can't move it, then you pretty much can't use the camera. So don't use the self-timer if you can help it. If you need a self-timer, I recommend just finding a self-timer which screws into the shutter button. These are easy to find. They were made by Walls and a lot of other companies. You can find them on eBay and places like that. You just screw them in, switch them over, and they work perfectly well. We'll go ahead and take a look at how to load the film inside the Kowa 180. And what you have to do is you have to find the film door release lever here on the left side and pop it upwards, and that causes the film door to pop open. You set your film canister on this side, and when you're loading the film in one of these cameras, make sure to hold the film canister down with your thumb so it doesn't pop out while you're trying to load the film. With the film canister held down, pull the film across the film chamber and feed it into the take-up spool, and simply wind and fire the shutter a few times until the film is pulled over and the holes in the film are engaged in the teeth on the take-up sprocket here. Once that's all set up, close the door and wind and fire the shutter a few times until the number 1 lines up with the mark inside the film counter. So that's pretty much it for the Kowa 180 rangefinder camera. I'll be listing this camera for sale shortly on my Etsy and eBay stores, and also on my new online store, JapanVintageCamera.com. If you're interested in purchasing this camera or another vintage Japanese camera, please visit my stores. I'll be posting more videos about vintage Japanese cameras and photography in Japan, so if you're interested in seeing these, please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.